Greetings, welcome to Dungeons and GURPS. I'm Enraged Eggplant, and in this video I'd like to tell you about how GURPS treats permanent and conditional effects. If you have played with GURPS magic, you probably know that there are some permanent spells such as Create Earth or Create Water, and that you can break the game economy easily by producing magical gold or other valuable substances. GURPS Dungeon Fantasy limits these durations to 1 day, if I recall things correctly, and unofficial GURPS magic errata also takes this problem on. Honestly, the economy breaking aspect isn't even that prominent, as I'm sure that a creative player will find a way to do it even without these spells. Magic always can do that. Nevertheless, this is what GURPS magic does, and I do not use that, as I prefer to use magic as powers. How do permanent effects work there? First, some spells and abilities have a permanent duration by default. This can be done either by applying the extended duration permanent plus 150%, this is usually accompanied by cosmic immune to dispel magic plus 50%, or extended duration truly permanent plus 300% enhancement. What's the difference? Permanent means that it can still be dispelled by dispel magic, remove curse, or some other condition. Truly permanent means that the effect is here to stay. This is, for example, how sorcery treats magic items. They are truly permanent effects. But all this costs a lot of points. Do you really need to buy a permanent spell that you probably don't have to cast in a single second at the moment's notice? It might seem as a waste of points, and it most likely will be. Such spells should be cast with hardcore improvisation, at least usually. But what if you want to learn a non-permanent version of a spell, but sometimes be able to make it permanent? Garf Powers has a framework of adding temporary enhancements. Adding extended duration at -2 to will per level of the enhancement is suggested. But permanent and truly permanent durations should not be available for this trick, as per the guidelines in GURPS Powers. However, GURPS Psionic Powers says that in over-the-top campaigns such techniques may be appropriate. If your GM says that this is the case, then permanent would impose a -15 penalty to will, and truly permanent would impose a -30 penalty. Those are huge penalties that will either require a lot of preparation, trial and error, or expenditure of points to buy off the techniques. Using the same approach, you can also make conditional effects by applying Delay Supernatural plus 100% at -10 to will. Another option that I find very interesting is described in a book that I have barely ever opened, GURPS Power-Ups 5 Impulse Buys, in the Changing the World chapter on page 13 to 15. Those all are wonderful options in my opinion, and I highly recommend checking out that chapter. The impulse points are expanded upon in the Impulse Control article in Pyramid 3 100. One of the interesting options is adding plus 50% worth of enhancements to an ability by spending an impulse point or character point. If you allow applying permanent durations to abilities this way, they will cost 3 character points for 150%, not the amount described in the Impulse Buy books. It's up to you to decide which way is better. I also suggest the following ability: Permanency Points. You have permanency points equal to this trait's level, which can be used to make effects permanent, as if they were unspent character points, using Changing the World. Permanency points return at a rate of 1 point per week of game time. This covers not only making afflictions or innate attacks permanent, but also such things as making control permanent, even when concentration is relinquished, making matter created with the Create Advantage permanent, and making summoned allies stick around, and so on. Speaking of the last two, here's a specialized version of permanency points for summoners. Summoning points. You have summoning points equal to this trait's level, which can be used to have conjured beings become permanent, independent residents of the summoner's world. as if they were unspent character points, using Changing the World from GURPS Power-Ups 5 impulse buys. Summoning points return at a rate of 1 point per week of game time. Create is a complex advantage. To prevent ruinous impact on the economy, created matter is not stable and has to be stabilized with character points from the so-called creation pool. Alternatively, the book suggests purchasing wealth and/or independent income. But what about using independent income as a proper alternative to the creation pool? I suggest another ability that could work as an alternative to the permanency points. Creation income. You possess an internal pool of energy that can be used to stabilize matter created with a create advantage. Your virtual monthly income is 1% of your starting wealth, adjusted for wealth level, per level of this trait to a maximum of 20%. You may spend this virtual currency to stabilize matter instead of character points and to fulfill inherent item value requirement when enchanting using sorcery. One thing that I haven't talked about yet is why is this important to me. Often when you play a game you see permanent magical effects in the dungeons or in the world around them. Floating castles, permanent anti-magic fields, and so on. Typically the justification is that an NPC did it, or that the knowledge of how to do it was lost. Personally, I really dislike NPC-only mechanics. If an NPC can do something, then a player character should be able to do that too. What if your player asks how he can get his own floating castle? Now, instead of telling him that he can't, I will tell him to learn some gravity spells and make them permanent by spending impulse points. While I also don't like meta currencies, I think this use of impulse points is very good, even for games that do not use impulse points for anything else. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.